Welcome to another edition of Geopolitics and Empire. Remember that I just left TNT Radio after 2 amazing years there, and I need your support to continue producing and developing Geopolitics and Empire. So you can become a paid subscriber on Substack for $5. Buy me a coffee or send reinforcements via donor box. Today we're joined by Ryan Cristián, his second round here on Geopolitics and Empire. It's been quite a while. Of course, he's from the Last American Vagabond, the lastamericanvagabond.com, one of the numero uno alternative guerrilla independent media outfits. ¿Cómo estás, Ryan?
I appreciate that, man. That means a lot coming from you. Thank you. I'm doing well, and it's nice to be back to join you again. I really enjoyed our conversation last time, so I'm looking forward to getting into many different topics.
Yeah, I want to get your broad take on what's happening. I think last time we focused a lot on the biosecurity state because we were in the thick of it, right? COVID-1984. But maybe to start with your plight, with what's happening with you, whatever you want to tell us about it, as well as getting your thoughts on the state of non-mainstream media, alternative or independent media. It seems that many are under constant attack and threats. This includes financial issues, trying to stay afloat because it's a tough business, attacks by the government, intelligence agencies, mainstream media itself, slander, right? Private individuals or outfits attacking independent media. And so, your thoughts on the wider space. We can get into the mammies. There's grifting. There's I think infiltration. The deep state is certainly infiltrating independent media. And then what's happening with you right now?
Yeah, thanks for getting into all this too, because it's a difficult situation. If those have been doing this long enough, remember the time, we're not that long ago, where even the concept of censorship was sort of like a conspiracy theory, right? Like the YouTube conversation, you're being censored, like, oh, you probably did something wrong, or they was kind of brushed away. And so now we've gotten to a point, at least, where it's kind of common knowledge that this does happen. There's just become, as usual, it's conspiracy theory, and then no, here's how it's happening, but here's why we've always been doing it. And so it's a difficult situation even still, because trying to bring this to the forefront, the conversations, people sometimes perceive it as using this as a kind of a way to manipulate people. There's always trolls out there that will frame what you're doing in a manipulative way. But I think at the end of the day, I take it as problematic because I'm so hyper-focused, as I think we should be, on all the important things in the world. And so I almost feel guilty going like, here's what I'm dealing with while people are starving to death in Gaza. So it's a difficult situation. All that being said, the reason that I felt, and those also following us for as long as TLAV has been around, it's something that I rarely do. It's something I actually hate doing. I hate the whole marketing side of it. But that we have gone, just in the last month alone, and we've been under attack for a long time, censorship more than most people I know. In the last month alone, I've gotten 2 separate lawsuits, completely separate. Like, they're not connected. The people doing these don't even know each other. They're not from the same category, anything connected, other than the fact that they're using the same lawyer. So to me, that feels really transparent. That either means to me that the lawyer himself just decided to push this because they don't like me, or that somebody else, my lawyer tends to think that, based on the engagement with both of these, that there's something else behind this. They don't seem to be interested in usually these kind of like ambulance chasers are his argument is that they kind of just throw these out to as many people as possible in hopes that they get somebody that just pays them off. And the problem here is that they don't seem to want to engage that way with what we're dealing with. My lawyer was almost like flabbergasted by this. He's like, I don't understand. They seem to want to maximize their own. Long story short, they seem to be driving this to maximize my issue, my time, my money. And in a case where I think it's certainly possible that I could, win, whatever that would look like. Now, all that being said, there's the lawsuit side of it. I'm not going to get into the details of exactly what it's about just yet. I've already said many times, I promise I will 100%, no matter what happens, kind of lay this out for everybody to see. I want people to know what this law group is because I feel it's frivolous. But my lawyer, as many know, will argue that, you don't want to put these things out because you don't know how that could hurt you in the lawsuit if we go to court and so on. But I'm going to make a point to kind of air this out. But the other side of this, which is what I feel is so interesting in the timing of it all, is that at the same time, and I've had my little kind of brush ups with the IRS over the years for things they claim I didn't do, which, I've gone off on the IRS conversation many times. I think it's an illegitimate institution, unconstitutional, and specific for things just like this, by the way, which it's almost unaccountable. But my point is that I've dealt with it as best I could. And all of a sudden in the same month, I get this letter that came in from them that says that they're threatening to levy my assets, which to me, that's TLEV. That's the only thing that I have that I think would even mean something like that. And that they're claiming I owe about 30 grand from a 2012, tax filing. Now, everyone has rightly pointed out that that's past, like, well, I guess whatever the term would be, the statute of limitations or whatever for the time frame. The argument they're claiming is that this is something that's been ongoing, and I'm just like, well, my accountant has no idea. I've never heard this before, and so the bottom line is they're saying they demanded I had to pay a certain amount by the end of this time frame, as if which was this month, as if it's been that long and I just haven't done it, or that they were going to start the process. So all that's to say that I can't speak to their intentions or what it's about, or maybe I missed something. But from my perspective, with my accountant and my lawyer, we're all just like, this feels very coordinated. It feels very, it feels it's meant to kind of drain our resources and our time. And it's one side of it's directed at me personally. The other side's directed at the TLAB business. I just find that really hard to not see how that all plays out. Now, what we've done with our Gibson Go is just kind of raise funds, not around just this, but this is kind of why I feel like I had to do this, because if I didn't, I already had to pull off writing. Derek and Robert and some of our writers, I had to kind of pull back on what they're writing. I have to, spend insurmountable amounts of money for this lawyer process, which I just can't stand, and the IRS. And so the point is that it's about the longevity of TLAV, right? And I want people to invest in this, not because of the attacks, but because they want this to succeed and continue and get these recurring donations, which, as you mentioned in the beginning, we're all at a time where this is one of the most important moments in history, I think, for independent media, truly independent media. And all that said, that's important to TLAV and me, and I appreciate everyone's support, but I think there's much bigger things going on in the world, as you pointed out. And on top of that, as you said, there's a lot of dynamics out there, as I think David Icke kind of coined the mainstream alternative media MAM term, I think. And I think that's perfect. It's something we've all been highlighting for a really long time, that there is an industry, and a lot of them that I think don't even truly understand, or kind of in a willful ignorant sense, don't let themselves understand that they're part of that, right? But it's very clear. And these partisan sides, and both sides of it, are effectively making people believe that something new is happening, and they're kind of folding them right back into the problem, And so I think that's a really important thing to see all this happening at the same time, where an unprecedented level of attacks, I do think, on independent media, different than before, was very transparent and on the surface, blunt censorship. Now it's almost like this weird surreptitious under the scene kind of thing, like Twitter is free speech, except it's censoring people or suppressing content. And at the same time, you're seeing this massive rise of all these people out of nowhere with massive funding, weirdly connected all right back to the same mainstream media people. It's very concerning. So I'll leave it there for now. But I think what we're all seeing is that it's important now more than ever to support independent media, nonpartisan, objective, independent media that cares about the truth over anything else.
Yeah, and just a few examples. What you're experiencing now, this sort of lawfare, is something that I've had in the back of my mind as well, and I had worried about, because what freaked me out first was 2 years that I was targeted by the Department of Homeland Security to have take my PayPal down, and so it's just like, if that that's the shots fired, right? And then the next thing, what's happening to you can easily happen to me, although a little bit more difficult, because I'm in Mexico and I don't even care about ever coming back to America. So even the whole IRS thing, I'm like, okay, whatever. I'm not coming back to America. What are you going to do to me? And so,
right.
But
maybe seeing the Last Mexican Vagabond coming up soon, right?
Right. There you go. The Last Mexican Vagabond. And so there's that. I also didn't want to mention, I also cut writing from Geopolitics and Empire, even while I was still with TNT. The cost of living now, because of the exchange rate, I had lost like 20% of my income, and so this is a problem with a lot of us here in this space trying to get the truth out. And I also don't want to mention, I won't name any names, but I did hear a story of someone else in alternative media who had a issue with the law. And I think we have to be careful. I think this person, and this was, you can find the actual information, this person was not, I think, entirely truthful about what happened to them. And so, again, that goes back to what you were saying earlier. We have to be upfront, and we have to be careful with alternative media. And then there's this discussion now about the wellness company and Amazing Polly. And, I enjoyed very much Amazing Polly's work, but I think her attitude has come off of slightly a bit unhinged, to the point where I'm kind of not trusting anyone now, and so in that particular spat, But and before moving on to the big topics, any final thought about how people should discern or consume alternative media?
It's the same as always. As I know you agree with, just question everything, which doesn't mean dismiss anything. It literally means entertain every possibility while giving the same skepticism, questioning all of it simultaneously, And it's not as complicated as it may sound. It's just a mindset. It's anything that comes across your table. You're always of the mind that even if you trust the person, they could be wrong. They could be misinformed themselves. They could have the best of intentions and still be incorrect. And that's why we do our due diligence and we question it and end up in a place where if we don't know for sure that we leave it there. We don't just pick a side because we're forced to, and with the wellness company thing in the same way, like I think that's, there's been things in this conversation as well that I'm like, yeah, it's really quick these days. And I think this can be part of the agenda from, whether it's about the lie itself, if that's the case, or it's people trying to cover the truth with the claim that it's a lie, that people will just broad stroke. Like where everybody who even touched base or got a donation from this group is now suddenly X, Y, and Z. Like Dr. Peter McCullough was like very quickly like there, and I certainly could mean something, but I don't know why we would assume that. His work has been stellar in this conversation, and I think that is a dangerous assumption, But to your point, we should very clearly wonder, is this irrational? Is there more to it? Is there a personal agenda here? It's just question everything. And that shouldn't be taken as an attack on anybody. It's the same skepticism applied to everybody, especially those that you believe and trust. I think that's important.
Yeah, just one example of that. Yeah, it's happened in every place that I've worked. You've had good people, bad decisions, and that doesn't. You can't just say the whole institution is junk now. And perfectly as you mentioned, there were people who got into wellness company and got no idea. Or my experience with TNT Radio. Like my experience was amazing for 2 years. They left me alone, literally. Like they left me alone. They paid me on time. Amazing. And then there's other people who are going out and attacking TNT Radio, calling it controlled opposition. It's just like, look, I had the greatest time of my life. Other people, had some issues. And so we have to be careful with that. And then, one of my favorite topics, the globalist agendas, the neo-feudal great reset, one world government project, eating the bugs, riding the bicycles, living in a hut. I also put under that umbrella, the biosecurity state, which we discussed last time. What's your sort of, where are you at? How do you see the advance of this agenda? We see, just today, I was reading that in the UK, what was it reported here? The energy price crisis caused the sharpest increase in UK absolute poverty in 30 years. New figures show. By the way, lecturer Stuart J. Hooper, who's British, he wrote an article exactly about that 2 years ago. He just posted, he quote tweeting the article from Geopolitics and Empire that he wrote. He said, I literally predicted this in September 2022. You go back to that article. He literally said that. And so it's this idea to wipe out the middle class, to make energy more expensive. The governor of my state in Mexico last month openly said we're trying through the vehicle emissions test and tax, which they just started last year in Mexico. We're trying to disincentivize you from using your car. Basically said we're trying to take away your cars. And so where do you sort of see the whole Great Reset project, global governance and all that?
Yeah, well, to your point too, just right there, I think it's hilarious that, why he was able to predict it, because they did it transparently. And it was like, the whole point was, it's the energy crisis has caused this. No, this engineered energy crisis has caused poverty by design. That's what we all seem to be able to highlight. It wasn't Putin's whatever they claimed just on it, to Putin did it to you. It was clear choices made by government bodies that drove these things into reality, and yet they just go this organic crisis, this energy crisis, like it's just this benign thing that we can't control. It's just so insulting, and the best thing about like what's going on with Israel and a lot of other things is the average people, for whatever reason, are seeing through things today. Like really, like that kind of statement going, well, you did this. It's a powerful moment that we hopefully can capitalize on, and that speaks to all of these things. In particular, the kind of budding, I shouldn't even call it budding, the reemergence of the real global governance that's always been present, and I think that where I see it now is, like for instance, the pandemic accord is not gone. They're in fact really pushing it again. They're putting out videos. I saw Tedros just talking about it again, really talking about how we all need to come together to make this happen. And so all this is about is controlling, as we all know, from a medical angle, just your choices and what you can do as individual people, and I think that is the biggest concern from this kind of technocratic mindset. And where it's at is rushing forward. I mean, just because we're paying attention elsewhere, there's still all of these actions going forward. There's still and I don't know whether I can say for sure that every aspect of this is like consciously part of some great reset plan, but it all leads to the same direction. For example, Lahaina, this game they play where it's totally not about the smart city concept. Yet during that time and before it, they had the Maui Now concept where they outlined exactly that in their documents. And now they're pushing it again and telling you, here's what we're going to rebuild with this whole area. And so I'm not saying, again, that these people knowingly did this for a great reset, but you can just see how it's all still absolutely going in that direction. Now, some people may think that's a positive thing, that maybe these smart cities and everything else are for your interest. And I can guarantee you in some ways you'll feel that way here and there. Oh, this is convenient. This works faster. But at the end of the day, it is absolutely going to be condensed into a position where you, when it matters, will not be in control of your life. And that's all that really comes down to. I mean, it's across the board and we all see it. And this is coming, migration, for example, to bring it back to like a partisan conversation. We all can see how from like the Palestinians even, they're already being accused of weaponized migration, even with the Palestinians. But what about the Mexican border conversation, right? I mean, there's obvious proof that Israel to some degree is at least involved with those actions in some way. And I've made this very clear in regard to Mossad entities, for example, being caught on the border. Now, I'm not saying that means everything, but my point is that it's clear that all of these things are being driven for small agendas. I shouldn't say small, but let's just say specific agendas. And then also being used for, well, what do we do about that? How do we stop them? Well, we need digital IDs. We need passports, vaccine passport, all these different kind of overlaps. And so I guess I'm kind of going off on this, but I guess my point is that I think it is absolutely in real time happening and we can all see it building. And it's really just about whether or not we decide as a society that these people are acting in our best interest. And I mean like as the entirety of our governments of the world. And that's a hard thing for people to wrap their minds around. Look at what's the current state of the rules-based international order? Do they care about the rules? Is there order? It's like, I think these things are breaking down in front of us, which ultimately amounts to a very positive moment if we choose to capitalize on it, where we can stop what they're trying to build.
Yeah, just another example that came to mind was when I was in the U.S. last year, and it was the first time in my life I experienced it. When you're on the tollway, before when I was growing up, you could throw in change, pay your toll with physical cash. And I was like shocked. Literally, my heart was almost racing. I was going out to see Colonel Douglas McGregor with Rick Rozoff of Stop NATO last year, and we were driving out into rural Illinois, and I was like there was no. We're going to pass the toll, and I didn't know if I was using someone else's car. I don't know if they had the tag or not, or I think it now reads your license plate. And I was in Mexico City recently, which is massive, and they had the same thing in Mexico City. And so it's just like you say, it's convenient, but when the penny drops, all of that convenience is going to be wiped aside. When they,
right.
With this system, when they say you can't drive your car anymore. And then when that sets in, it's like I literally can't go anywhere. And it's just like that's going to be that. It's a long range thing. So right now, as you say, they bring out all the roses and unicorns and but when that penny drops in 5 years or 10, it's going to be if we get there, as you say. Any thought then on there's the whole disease X thing. You think they're going to try? I kind of don't doubt that they will. You see them testing the waters, Alaska pox, measles. Alaska pox, really. If they might try to implement again what they did in the 2000s with us.
It's a good question, actually. I might kind of don't think. Maybe that was in the cards to begin with, but I'm getting the sense that I think they're all to some degree realizing that they really have lost a lot of influence, whether it's because of the Israel conversation or even before that, because of the COVID-19 complete breakdown of their narrative. I don't know, but I think that they're at a point where they really might be genuinely going, maybe we just shouldn't do it the same way, which is usually not how that works, quite honestly. As we know, they kind of just regather and try it again from a different angle, pretty much the same agenda. But to add one more point to both of these things, going back to the Great Reset, technocratic kind of world governance thing, one of the things that really worries me is the mindset. And this is what's so hard to get into this conversation, is because to the average person, even people that are invested in this conversation, still sort of regard some of these topics as crazy or conspiracy theory. And the idea of things like nanotechnology, smart dust, these are things that are they're as provable as anything can be provable. There's all sorts of peer-reviewed science. There's real-world physical examples. You can argue it's all fabricated because some people make that argument, but ultimately, the argument is, or the data is clear, going back decades. Dust networks from like 20 plus years ago, using these things for open air shipment conversation. I've seen this. I've gone over this entire shows. So what I want people to worry about is the rationalization of how the next step can be folded in to meet these current problems. And the idea of, well, guess what? It turns out we've already deployed nanotechnology and we can utilize this to monitor X, Y, and Z, or overlapping with the 5G conversation. All of these buzzwords usually scare people away that think, oh, I'm not supposed to talk about this stuff. But it's all real world conversation stuff. It's all actually happening. Now, we could talk about like the lipid nanoparticle in the shot, which you could argue is just a lipid, nano-sized particle. But there's all sorts of new information coming out about very weird anomalies, right? About extra proteins or the was it something folding? I'm forgetting the term they use, or the idea of finding random metals or finding all sorts of extra, things that shouldn't be there, DNA problems, and so the question becomes, is that just a random byproduct, or is this actually something else that was done there? Which we shouldn't really be that hard to recognize. But my point then is to realize that the idea of nanotechnology at a core value has been pushed, or a core concept has been pushed as the next thing for a while now. And I want us to worry about how that might be rationalized with things like, with the geoengineering overlap and the idea of smart dust and how that could be applied and used to really achieve all these things they're trying to claim they can accomplish with it. I think that's a scary thing to realize, because that is, overlapping with transhumanism, which again is part of what we're actually talking about.
Yeah, I think that's something we need to discuss, and hopefully going forward, I can get into that more. And maybe sometimes why I don't talk about it enough, because when you get, that's really cutting edge stuff. When we talk about COVID or geopolitics, we've got more data, we've got more declassified documents, and we can much more easily sift through that to figure out the picture. But when you're talking about these technologies, it's like it takes a lot more effort and energy to collect those papers, to sit down and figure out what's going on, to get on an expert who can explain it more. And again, there, I've seen in alternative media, there are some wacky people talking about this stuff. And so, even some that are extremely popular. And that's why I kind of shy away. I want to take time to treat it in an academic, credible fashion, right? And not just get some big, some guest that's been all over alternative media just spouting all this sort of wacky nonsense on 5G. And it's like, no, we have to have an academic approach. And so that takes a little more time, and it's a little more difficult. And then the war agenda, right? The World War III agenda, I kind of see everything tied together. It's like a multi-front war, right? Ukraine, Israel, Gaza, the Middle East, Iran, right? I think it's a perfect pretext to start war with Iran. They've been wanting to do that for the longest time. And then I think soon that's going to link to Taiwan, China. And then again, you're seeing, I call this the 100-year crisis. I've been saying it's like the 1930s again. You see it all at flashpoints everywhere: Venezuela, Guyana, U.S., Mexico, the Caucasus, Armenia, Azerbaijan. It's just all these flashpoints everywhere, and I think everything is linked. And I know you focus a lot on Israel, but your thoughts on what's happening in Israel, and then the as Dr. Paul Craig Roberts would say, the ever widening war.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of multifaceted agendas, right? That's never just one. As much as people love to try to make it about one family, one group, one government, it's very multifaceted, as you know. And I think that if we're trying to make it, trying to outline the broader points of what connects it, I think it's clear that you have invested interests from a lot of these colonial powers that are really, abusing countries for their own benefit. That shouldn't even be that hard for people to acknowledge today. It's a classic concept. Looking even before the United States, Britain and Africa and these different, they have been put in positions where they are kept in insecurity for, in every way to benefit the people that are occupying them. This is classic occupation. And we've seen this with all these different countries: rare earth minerals, lithium, gold, oil. It's nonstop. And so all these different examples, it's not hard to recognize that in the biggest flashpoints everywhere in the world, there just so happens to be something there that's coveted by the people that are back there pulling the strings and fanning the flames, with the U.S. aids and the different aspects. Now, that's from a very American, U.S.-centric perspective, because first of all, I'm an American, and I believe that I can make have the most effect on the outcome by pointing these things out for Americans. But it's also pretty obvious that the U.S. government is absolutely the most prime example of doing this around the world, unquestioningly, despite all the propaganda. And then, from the Israel side of that, I think that they're acutely involved with this. Now, people debate about whether it's, a Zionist government completely over influencing the U.S. government that way, or that's the U.S. government that has more control over what Israel can do. There's kind of dynamics to both. I quite frankly clearly see right now the outlines of Zionist influence over U.S. policy. I think that's self-evident. But speaking on the larger wars, I can't say I can speak to exactly for example, with many of them, I don't think we can. I wouldn't say I can prove that they're doing this for that, but you can clearly see that they're taking advantage of what's happening to benefit themselves, right? And I think without that, to make it simple, without that going on, there would be conflict. There always has been, but I think that is the key issue, is that you have people that have recognized not just a profit, but a measure of control, indefinite, if they can keep people in insecurity and constant conflict and at risk of everything, whether you're going to get food that day, whether you're going to be able to feed or give your child water. That's what we're seeing in Gaza right now. But I think if you keep them in that position, like with Africa, well, and of course, blame it on whoever else is over there trying to make agreements. Oh, China trying to make an agreement with them. Well, at least I'm not thinking China is necessarily always in the best interest of anybody. I don't trust any government, but it's a little bit different when you're having a mutual signed agreement than just taking what you want and claiming terrorism and blaming everybody else, So I think that's ultimately the biggest example. But again, very multifaceted. I'm sure we could talk about a lot of other players in the world that do the same thing.
Yeah. And my point was that, I kind of, I call it the 100-year storm because it's a time where it's everything coming together. The economic system is collapsing, law and order is collapsing, culture is degenerating, and so that's why Venezuela says there's no rules anymore. I'm going to go at Guyana. Azerbaijan says let's take Nagorno-Karabakh. Who's going to stop us, right? And so, as you mentioned, there are these individual oligarchic agendas overlapping with, I think, this global elite who want to push their agenda. So they're, it's sort of like a feeding frenzy, right? When it comes to, like, if you use sharks as an example, and going back to Israel, you've probably seen this video was actually quite shocking. I don't really say this, but like yesterday, or it was posted that this drone kill, apparent 4 Palestinian youths just walking, that has to be a war crime. And I'm like, it's mind boggling. It was literally just out of nowhere, you see them explode. Literally, their bodies explode. And then Edward Snowden chimes in and he says, you need to understand that the technical capability behind such killings is becoming increasingly easy to achieve and increasingly automated. Soon enough, an official will drag their finger across a map, and anyone judged by a crude algorithm to have crossed that line will die. And you know that I've taken Edwin Black's term, who's been a guest on the podcast. Algorithm ghetto is my favorite term for the whole cashless society, social credit thing, and it's Black. It's a Skynet becoming self-aware. It's Terminator. It's Black Mirror, right? The Metalhead episode. And now we have Snowden literally saying, and then we saw the video yesterday. They just click and boom, you're gone, you're dead. Right. And that kind of links to what we were saying earlier with the smart city option. They can shut you off, so you literally won't be able to buy food. So you can either slowly starve to death, or they can just simply take you out with one drone. Like out of nowhere, you literally explode physically. And so, right. I don't know if you saw that video. Thoughts on that? And a lot of people say what's being it's like they're prototyping a lot of what they're doing in Ukraine. Right. Is like a laboratory that they want to then do to the wider world, or what's happening in Palestine, the surveillance checkpoint states, and Ukraine. They got the DIA digital app. They want to build back better. And further thoughts here.
Yeah, well, I think the point is that clearly that's a provable. I mean, Abby Martin has done amazing work on that in the past. A lot of people have, highlighting that they proudly display war-tested, battle-proven things that they've used on Palestinians. And that's a provable fact, right? So yes, when they're using these things, and in other fields of war too, they will go out and sell those prototypes and new weapons and new things in these, these arms trading conventions. It's funny how it's, weapons bad when they do it, but it's okay when the good guys sell weapons to each other. But it's a provable reality, and I think that's a disgusting concept in and of itself. But then you can overlap that with the idea of the Habsora program, which is the gospel in translation, which is, as you probably see in a 972 magazine's article called "The Mass Assassination Factory" or the AI assassination. I forget the exact. I think it was AI assassination factory, something like that. And it's exactly what we're talking about. I mean, I think there were 6, some former, some current IDF members on the record with them, saying that they were just, one of the quotes was, we're taking down buildings just to take down buildings, right? Like just openly acknowledging war crimes. And so to your point, that video was just I mean, you could argue that maybe somebody was the one to push the button, but your point is clear that we're getting to a point to where they're acknowledging it's even in that article that it's their pressure to get the most amount of targets, which incentivizes less and less engagement with whether or not the machine is correct. I mean, they're literally driving that. They're manufacturing the design to where you can go, oh, well, the AI did it. I wasn't even involved. I just approved the AI said the right thing. That's crazy, you know? And I think that's very clear that that's happening from the very beginning. And I think that, yes, I think this will be used to going forward, go like, look, this is how this can be applied to, you know, terrorists at the home front, which then just become, you know, unruly people at the home front or protesters at the home front. Like it slowly pulls back into normal domestic things. To your point before, I think is interesting about Venezuela, Ghana, like these different world situations. Now, I don't know if I read that as, you know, like for instance, Russia will pretty consistently speak up and present itself as the counterbalance to the belligerent nature of the U.S. government today. Now, I've often pointed out, like that certainly could be that they just believe that, which is an indication that maybe to some degree they're better than the kind of belligerence over. But it could just be that they're recognizing that it's smart to play that role, right? Like that it's clearly in our interest because we're not sociopaths, at least whatever. We could see that we can act good at the very least. And so ultimately that might be part of it. So my point with all these different wars, I'm not sure if I see it as, you know, that being driven to somewhat reality or Venezuela, the rest of them kind of going, well, I'm going to take advantage of this because nobody else is. I truly think that, like I've said before, if the U.S. wasn't here and there was some other government to fill the role, whoever that would be, and call me a pessimist, maybe I am just jaded, they would eventually end up in the same role as the U.S. government today. That's how I see power. That's how I see the way this works. And that's why we need to change the way we view these things, not just keep rolling through the hamster wheel of voting and new governments and so on. And I think that that's an interesting point to make here, is that Venezuela and the rest of them are probably just going, okay, fine. We will do the same thing because you're doing that. But I don't know. I don't know if we know for sure. And I do think that there are some examples of elements of other governments that like Bolivia, for example. I kind of genuinely thought that at least to a large degree, Evo Morales was acting in the best interest of his people, you know, and that just angered outside parties that wanted it in the best interest of them at the expense of their people, and they removed him. But does that mean he's the amazing person that only does the right thing? I never think it's that simple, you know?
And, you know, you touched on what I was a question that I always tend to ask. I think you probably view things the same way, the whole BRICS multipolarity thing. And there's a lot of Western alternative media who worship at the altar of Putin or Xi Jinping and multipolarity. And I've lived in Kazakhstan, in the former Soviet Union. I've been to China. I've been to Russia. And, you know, let me tell you, they're doing the same things, right? The same totalitarian things that are being done in the West. And you know, but not if you're particularly a foreigner and you go over there, you've got a little extra freedom. But if you cross some red lines, you're going to end up in trouble. But we see cases of, you know, I've met Kazakh dissidents, or I've experienced, you know, censorship and authoritarianism in Kazakhstan, and in Russia the same. Dissidents go to jail, Strelkov, and others. So the grass is not greener. I just I feel like there's no good actors. They're all just the same. You know, they're like all Mexican cartel. They're all cartel members, and they're just vying for power. And life would basically be the same, whether it's under the U.S. empire or multipolarity. Do you have any thought there?
I mean, I wouldn't say it's the same, but I agree with your point. I think that it's about the ebbing and flowing of power, and I think that, you know, if it would be different, it would be flavored in the Russian authoritarianism, you know, but it would, I think, or Chinese, but it would be the same kind of idea. But that's not to say, like, this is where we get into the two-party paradigm, childish nature of how this works, where it's all or nothing, it's only this or it's only that. And the truth is that it's clearly, that's not, but what we just described is not to say that you know, that the U.S. and all these governments are lying about things about China all the time. They're lying about things about Russia all the time. We all see that. But does that mean the opposite is true? Not always the case, right? I think your point is the same. I think we agree that these governments are in the interest of themselves. And in many cases, in many times, that can align with what interest of the people. And especially when you're in that position, when you're defending against another powerful authoritarian government, it's easy to play the person that's in line with the interest of the people, right? But all of a sudden, when it becomes that you have all the power and no one can push back on you, well, I think it'll shift. You know, I'm not psychic. Maybe I'm wrong, but I agree with you. And I think that history has shown that very clearly. And I think that we just kind of go through this ebbing and flowing of power. I mean, James Corbett has written about the engineered fall of the West for a long time. And I think we're watching that play out. And the real power players of the world, they don't care pretending a multipolar BRICS grouping or a UN or a United States. They don't care who they control you through as long as they control you. And I think that's what they're really trying to do with the back to the Great Reset and the kind of Accord and all this stuff. Let's not forget that Russia and I mean, all of them for that matter, are in many different ways overlap with the exact same problem. Russia, very clearly. And I don't know why that doesn't bother some of these other people that, alternatively can highlight the Great Reset, the COVID-19 illusion, but then from a foreign policy perspective would highlight what you're saying and say the BRICS is the way to go. And again, maybe they're right. I'm far more jaded and pessimistic about this because of history, I think.
Yeah, and people can go back to my interview with Professor William I. Robinson, who's hardcore leftist Marxist, but his analysis is spot on, and he talks about the global civil war, and in his subsequent writings, he's called out BRICS and multipolarity, and his thesis is that there's this transnational class, as you just alluded to, and for them they own the assets, they don't care who's playing the role of it's like the U.S. left-right paradigm writ global, right? East versus West, and it's the same. They control assets in Russia and China and elsewhere. And just going back to Israel for a second.
Well, real quick, let me add one more thing to BRICS before we jump forward. I would say though that I do think that it's easy to argue that a BRICS dynamic or an alternative on this side would be better than what we're currently dealing with. Right, like an actual version of that. That's not to say that I trust any of them anymore. It's just clear that, even with just taking the UN dynamic, for example, the UN is just a multifaceted body. Now, the actual body of the UN, I think there's a lot of reason to be skeptical about what their intentions may be, but realizing the UN councils, these are different countries. This is back, same point. When Evo Morales made a whole big statement about Pompeo, about all of them, I made the argument while he was making that statement, get ready for regime change. You could literally see Pompeo giving him a death stare. You knew it was going to, and then later it happened. My point is that you have examples of people within that they're speaking their mind for their own interest or not. And I think that is always better. Not that we should allow the UN to have control, but having an area where multifaceted agendas can, even if they're all in their own interests, you can still use their agendas against each other, as the people, and be well, we disagree with that. And I think it ends up being better as opposed to just having one insurmountable power force. I mean, that's obvious, I think, but that's, even saying that, people will argue we're pro BRICS, and it's not the truth,
Yeah, and I think for me the word there is agency, and I think I have to agree. We can't deny that there is agency. There are real actors with real organic, natural agendas. Evo Morales, or to a different extent, Putin. There's an oligarchy in Russia, but then there's Putin, and we don't know what's going on in his mind. Or there are authentic actions and reactions and agency as well. That kind of goes back to what I said earlier. There's a lot of things shifting now, and then overlapping agendas, and it's all being they're duking it out now. And just going back to Israel for a second, what are your thoughts on the agenda there? It just seems clear. I believe that the state of Israel does have a right to exist, but beyond that, I'm just kind of you can't go around expanding settlements, knocking down Palestinians' homes, drone bombing them, setting up surveillance checkpoints. I mean, it's all insane. And then it seems clearly that they have an expansionist agenda to expand Israel. And then my fear is this threat of war with Iran. And any thoughts on the direction that's going?
Yeah, a lot. I mean, I think that at the end of the day, I don't think anybody at the core of the argument, I shouldn't say that, I mean, there's always somebody, but in a general sense that most people are arguing that Israel doesn't have a right to exist. What they're arguing is they don't have a right to exist on somebody else's land. And I think that's the obvious reality of the conversation, is that this is an illegal occupation. Now, again, you could go back in time as far as you want and make arguments, and I'm not saying it's wrong, but my point has always simply been that from 1948 forward, 47 forward, the point is that international law has always regarded, as I just went over a 1978 UN document, not just Gaza and the West Bank, but this is all occupied Palestine. That's, and that's been the international law. That's been the United Nations. Today, we talk about just Gaza and the West Bank, which again is essentially allowing Israel to illegally continue to settle and then just accepting that, right? Because really, that's even what we're dealing with today. West Bank and Gaza is dramatically less than even the 1967 conversation, which was about the two-state solution. It was supposed to enshrine those things, and Israel just continued taking more illegal settlements. The point, though, is that for me, I agree with you. And I think that we're at a point now where past all that, which is, by the way, again, why if you actually engage with the real conversation and highlight the fact that Netanyahu has been publicly called out for funding the group that did this in order to stop the two-state solution, right? Or, petitioning Mossad to go to Qatar to get billions in dollars in cash to go to Hamas all of these things matter. And the point being that they were never interested in truly achieving what they've always claimed they were in the two-state solution. Even the 67 conversation, the point, or let's just say the Oslo Accords in particular, it's very clear and now proven that Netanyahu has even leaked conversation on the record saying he had so many poison pills in this deal, he knew that they wouldn't accept it, right? Knowing this it's manufactured. So my point in saying all that is that we know that they weren't genuine in trying to achieve what they keep saying the Palestinians never allowed, right? That's clear today, as much as people try to disagree and just push it aside. And so that means that all this time forward, all the times the Palestinians have truly, and we can prove, continued to come to the table and fought for that two-state solution, Israel then made sure it didn't happen, right? And so that flavors the whole conversation. But that's only to highlight that means that they have manufactured the situation that they then point to justify what they claim they can do now. But I still would argue generations have been born in Israel. It's the same conversation in reverse. You can't just remove that. A lot of people, and this is something that on the other side, people tend to, broad strokes are everywhere today. We all see that there's plenty of Jews in Israel. There's plenty of Israelis in Israel and any other type of group we can point to that do not believe that Gazans should be murdered, that don't believe it should be, I can clearly show you it's a pretty good majority. And I think that's because of Zionist influence, but there's a lot of them that don't think that. And so that's all to say that ultimately, those people shouldn't be displaced in the same way because you point back to the original point. So that's where the two-state solution comes in. And anybody honest has been arguing that, but that's why now when it's the biggest time in the world we've ever seen where people are talking about this, where the information is circulating like never before, they've come out and said, that's never happening, never, we're not going to do that. Like just off the table, and I think it comes very clear that there's an interest from a Zionist entity that wants to remove these people. And I don't even know why we have to argue about that in online while they're actively saying this openly. We should burn them all. We should completely destroy the area. Nobody should exist. They're all human animals over and over. And I'm talking directly from leadership positions, and so it's very clear there. Now, other people, other Palestinians, right? These things are different, varying dynamics, but it all comes back to the fact that I think that what's happening is undeniable. What happened on October 7th, and this, again, these are all the bullet points. I mean, I could talk about this for 6 hours, as I often do on my show, is that ultimately this was a legally protected act. Now, that's going to bother people, but the reality is it is an occupied territory, despite all the lies and the arguments and 2005 election and all these are all points you could talk about. The truth is it's never been argued otherwise from any, as I think Francesca Albanese, the rapporteur for the UN, has made the point, it's lockstep. And has been for decades. Everybody in the international community across the board, it is occupied. Gaza is still occupied. And again, we shouldn't even need to debate that. They control everything about it, which was proven by the fact that they shut off all the food, water, and fuel. Right. So it's occupied, which means that an occupied entity, per the Fourth Geneva Convention, international law, has the right to armed resistance, armed struggle. Right. These are directly out of these documents. That means that what they did, whether it was Islamic Jihad, random Palestinians, Hamas, when they fought against military targets was a protected act under international law. Now, if they went on, which in cases we can prove, they did take civilians as hostages, that's a crime. They should be held accountable for that crime, right? But the point is that doesn't then invalidate the internationally protected act of armed resistance as an occupied territory all the way going forward. Now, again, we should get into the conversation about people who were killed. Now, I will clearly point out that Hamas likely killed people. It wouldn't surprise me in regard to civilians. My point, though, is that it's now become so obviously overlap with how we can prove the IDF also killed civilians that it's becoming very difficult for me to know I can say for sure who did what in that regard. We can prove that they took civilians back. So I'm just making that clear that they did commit crimes. So that's all to say that, yes, we should have issues with the things that were illegal. Going forward, it's been 5 months of nonstop belligerent genocide. And I just think it's crazy that we can't acknowledge that as I shouldn't say that. I think as a species, as humanity, it's like the vast majority of people in the world are acknowledging that. And we have politicians who are destroying their careers in order to gaslight for Israel. And I think that's transparent. But anyway, all that to be said, we can go in a million different directions. I think it's important to acknowledge that going forward, there is a solution. And I think it's very clear the Zionist agenda never wanted that solution and is invested as its identity to not allow Palestinians to have anything and are now proving that with everything they do. And I could get into the history of Zionism if that's important for your viewers, if you haven't talked about it, because it's also provable. And it's shocking for people that haven't heard it.
Yeah, I think you approach it from, again, an academic way with sources.
Always.
You put a lot of sources. And so, I agree with what you're saying. Hamas killed people, so has the IDF civilians. And so, and then, just I'm astonished daily, as you pointed out, from mainstream Israeli media, from the government itself, how they're openly making these statements, where if it was any other country, like they'd be, calling them all sorts of names. And what I like to do on Geopolitics and Empire is extrapolate, try to peer around the corner at what's coming. And for me, what's interesting as well is how wars are always great pretexts to shift borders. The 6 Day War, where Jerusalem came under Israel. Azerbaijan, the best recent examples, Azerbaijan taking Nagorno-Karabakh, the 2008, Russia, Georgia, the NATO, where Georgia, backed by NATO and the US, initiated that war. Then Russia took Ossetia. And then now Israel can use this current crisis to further expand. But also I fear we've had, Wesley Clark and many others outline the clear plans, and they've gone through Libya and Syria and Sudan, and Iran is the big one. I've had Francis Boyle talk about this on the podcast, saying, under the Bush administration, they were supposed to go under Iran. They passed the baton to subsequent administrations. For whatever reason, they never got around to it. Do you think they'll start something with Iran, or they kind of don't want to go there?
It's an interesting point, because I think right now things are different than they were before October 7th, like very clearly. And I think before October 7th, I would have argued that at some point that probably would have been played out to some degree, even though I still think at that time, because of other blundered agendas, that people were already very skeptical of just government narratives more than I've seen in a long time. And so I think it would have had to have taken some shocking event, which is usually what they do anyway, right? Some big thing, and and then it would have just been bull rushed forward out of screaming media. And even then, I would have been skeptical that the people were even in line with it, but they still would have felt they could just push it in either way, right? Now, today, that's still just as likely, or possibly, I should say, but I think it's different. I think the U.S. government is so terrified in the sense that they're losing. I mean, these videos I keep seeing of people being, from left and right, by the way, going up to people and just going like, how do you support this? And, the way they respond shows this like level of, it's revealing what they really are, like screaming at their own constituents. Like, when have we ever seen that before? It's interesting. So I think the U.S. government is acutely aware right now that they have either shot themselves in both feet or allowed Israel to do it, right? And they're just kind of like, we have lost so much influence because we're blindly supporting this. And I think even from the left side, by the way, as much as there was a lot of pushback from the leader, I hate using the word leadership, from the rulership side of the left, they're still completely supporting of this. They may say things out loud and then vote to fund them arms to go to them, So it's the same two-party illusion as usual. But from Israel's side, and this is what worries me, the religious Zionism party is the most rabid, sociopathic, psychopathic side of this. Even the ADL and groups in the past have called them crazy. Like, it's just, they're very extreme, very, very right-wing extreme. And I think the problem is that I see them already building the narratives for the prophecies, for things like the Third Temple, for like I don't know if you've seen this crazy article. This was on corporate media where there were these Zionist Jewish entities that were breeding red calves. I'm like, it's just like so on the surface. And the guy's talking to him like, is this a joke? Like, are you serious? They're literally talking about animal sacrifice in the time and age we're in. And, my point is that this is the kind of mindset of some of these people. And I'm worried that they're going to justify something, which would be like going back to the point of a big act, which then I think the U.S. they're clearly towing the line for this. So I would think they would fall over themselves to support whatever they would do. And what if that was some kind of an attack that they claim happened? Like, what if there was a major explosion inside of Tel Aviv or something like that? It would not be hard for Israel to just say, Iran did it. We know it. We can prove it. The U.S. would blindly support them. And I don't see how that wouldn't spin out. So that's what worries me. And I think that it just simply highlights, again, the belligerent nature of this Zionist government and their willingness to sacrifice everything to achieve what they want. I mean, we could talk about the Samson option, which is a public reality, and this is the kind of mindset that, well, if we don't get what we want, then nobody gets anything that they want. That's a scary thing.
Yeah, I've been aware of the red heifers in Third Temple for like 20 plus years. And I'm coming from this, again, from my own biblical Christian worldview, but it's like I view prophecy as, God knows everything. So he's like, that's what's going to happen. The point is, he's not saying to make it happen. He's saying
Right.
like that's what's going to happen. We're destined to go down that route. And then, as you mentioned, these people are breeding their red heifers and trying to bring about the third temple. And
That's Zionism, right
right.
there.
And
I mean,
I'm
that's sorry.
yeah,
Go ahead.
my view is that myself as a Christian, I'm like, that's not something I should be actively involved in or cheering on. I'm just observing, like, well, they said it's going to happen and it's happening. It's not like, but then you've got these mainline, what I would often say, fake Christians, which align, as you mentioned, with the Zionism. They're like, yeah, destroy the Al-Aqsa. Even if from my worldview, the Al-Aqsa mosque is it's a false religion, but I'm not going to touch it. That's not for me to go and blow it up or deal with any of that. And there's great documentaries by the Shin Bet itself, by the 1990s extremist Israelis were going to blow it up, and the Shin Bet stopped them and said, if you do that, it's going to be World War III. All Muslims for all the world are going to descend on Israel. And so they're like, yeah, maybe that's not a good idea. And so, yeah, any further thought on any of that?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is it's exactly the same point about the foundation, like the history of Zionism itself, which, the argument is always that this is, God gave us this land. And the thing is that there's like Torah Judaism is a very prominent group, Orthodox Jews around the world. And the point is that they often speak up and say, that's not true. We don't believe in a state of Israel. Zionism is not Judaism, and argue that the idea is that this, basically what Zionism did is step in and acted just like the red heifer. That's my point. As opposed to saying, that the Orthodox Jewish communities right there we're talking about are still claiming that they're waiting for God, right? Zionism did not get to decide that that's the reality. And it's the same thing we're talking about. And, you could prove this by showing that Britain gave them, the Balfour Declaration. It wasn't God that gave it, was the Britain gave them to them, and that wasn't internationally in line with international law at the time either. But my point is that this is the kind of thing you see, is that instead of waiting for it, as the Orthodox Jewish community would argue, they're just making it happen and pointing to it and saying, see, we're in line with God. And I think it's just that's the desperate agenda to try to convince the Jewish community of the world that Zionism is Judaism. And I think that finally people are it's breaking down. And I think it has been for a long time, but I think the real issue is that finally people have gotten over being scared of being called an anti-Semite with nothing to back it up, And there's an interesting point I'll end with, that right now Candace Owens is going, I guess she just got fired from Daily Mail or Daily Wire. And I kind of saw that coming, right? They've been butting heads for a while now. And I think what's interesting is that they're now going at the APAC, and the rest of them are going after her as a raging anti-Semite. And, and she just made the point. She's like, this has no power anymore. Everyone sees your tactics and sees how you do this. You're attacking me because I stood up for myself. And look, I disagree with Candace on plenty of things, but nothing she did was anti-Semitic. She's highlighting things that we can prove and things that are uncomfortable for conversations. And I shouldn't say I haven't seen everything she's ever done, but what they're pointing to, I've seen, and I don't see anything other than issues that they don't want people talking about from a Zionist perspective. And I think that's interesting to see how it's just breaking down, and today people aren't scared by that anymore. And that's good. It doesn't mean there's not racism. There's racism all over the place, but you shouldn't be called a racist because you highlight the crimes of a government. I think that's obvious.
And I'd agree with you. I mean, her response to them should be, well, you're racist. I'm black.
Exactly.
You're
exactly.
racist. It's that same logic. And, I'm joking, but I'm serious. I've had Canadian government funded Canada Vice journalists try to label Geopolitics and Empire and my work on TNT on Twitter as trying to link me to neo-Nazi, right-wing extremist, fascist stuff. And I just doubled down in their face. I actually had, maybe he's listening now. One listener they're angry that I don't believe that, Jews completely run the world. And he called Geopolitics and Empire Jew politics and empire, which proving that I'm not, neo-Nazi and my grandpa was a prisoner of the Nazis. And I just quote tweeted these people attacking me. And by the way, if they attack me, they're racist because I'm a minority Mexican. I'm a Mexican. And so again, I'm playing. And how would a neo-Nazi marry a brown person and integrate into, third world Mexico? Like, it doesn't make any sense. That's not something what a white supremacist nationalist would do. He would marry a white person and continue poo-pooing the third world. And so, again, another is a perfect example of what you say. It doesn't make sense with Candace Owen or myself or many other people. So they're racist for attacking Candace. And I don't agree with her on a lot of stuff either. With the Andrew Tate stuff, I'm not a fan of the Tate brothers. But just coming back to the home front, USA, my recent podcast guest, Professor Emeritus Jeffrey Paul, wrote a book saying we are one step removed from fascist autocracy in the US. I mean, look what's happening to you. We've got I was listening to Jason Burmis, who replaced me on TNT. He's calling it the Department of Homeland Security, Deutschland Security. Again, singling me out on PayPal, people being put in jail, the J6 crew, people being debanked. And I think you've talked about this now and others, and now how they're trying to create, this Christian nationalism linked with J6 as like domestic extremists, like the equivalent of what they did with Muslims abroad. They're creating that now in America. They want some sort of civil war, a pretext to crack down and then install a one-party system. It's not looking good. Your thoughts on that, and if you'll ever escape the U.S. and do the last Mexican vagabond.
I'll answer the last one first. Derek Bros has a community out there, and it's not that far fetched. My family's here, so I don't plan on it, and I don't like the idea of leaving in the sense that I know I can affect the most change here. But if I'm being threatened, if it gets far enough, who knows what's ultimately going to happen? But I think it's certainly in the possibility that I might end up having to, but I don't want to. But I think ultimately. I know it's going to do that. What was the other question? The first part was,
the home front. Like, how do you see things? You get the elections, talk of civil war.
The point you brought up before was I kind of said it's vanilla ISIS. It's the same argument. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't have to line up. It's the argument that, well, you've got these foreign, Iranian bad guys that are working with your domestic neo-Nazis. And it's like, well, how does it even possibly line up? But that's what people are arguing, that the MAGA people were working secretly over here with the Iranians because they all hate your freedom or whatever their narrative was. And it's just clumsy, and the real point is that you could prove, and I have covered this quite extensively going overlap with Ukraine, but it's much bigger than that there has been a clear agenda to manufacture the domestic terrorism threat. Doesn't mean that there's not people that are dangerous, obviously, but that's clearly manufactured. The January 6th point was obvious, right? Where the same thing they did with anti-Semitism, by the way, ADL, that ultimately, I think it was ADL. The point is that during January 6th, as you know, they interrogated literally everybody that they could see on video that they said or tried, except for Ray Epps, of course, because, he's, this is funny, but everybody, and the grandma with her cell phone became a domestic terrorism investigation, right? And so all of a sudden, what they do after a couple of months, they said, oh my God, investigations into domestic terrorism have spiked 500%. It's like, well, that's because you labeled everything domestic terrorism that wasn't just people that were there. Anti-Semitism was the same thing with this. Anybody that said free Palestine was labeled anti-Semites, and they went, oh my God, 900% spike in anti-Semitism, And so I think the problem with back to the domestic terrorism is that it's obviously manufactured. They're trying to goad people. This is what I think that's what I've called it, the MAGA trap. I think that there's a lot of people on the right side of the two-party illusion. I think they're all lost in certain ways, but that truly see some parts of this. And most of them are much more in line with like believing deeply in the Constitution, which, by the way, U.S. documents have outlined as a problem. More than once outlined people that believe too much in the Constitution as being a threat. It's like, that's pretty wild. But that ultimately they're trying to trick them like January 6th really clearly was. And it's provable, despite what people want to argue. It's overwhelmingly obvious that they were trying to trap them, but they didn't show up with guns, right? So they didn't take the bait. They tried to call Ray Epps out as a Fed. They knew what was going on to some degree, but there were players there that acted. That's the agent provocateur. And I think what's important to see is that the overlap with the Azov movement was a very clear agenda going back decades. Project Aerodynamic was the CIA seeding fascism into Ukraine in order to achieve the same thing they tried to do in Afghanistan, right? Using the bad guy, the very terrorists they pretend they're fighting to try to hurt Russia or Soviet Union at the time, right? So now we have the idea with the Azov movement, or rather at the time it was the Organization for Ukrainian Nationalists. Michael Lebed was a Nazi war criminal that they put up in New York and Ukraine and ran a media company because that's where our government fighting the Nazis made sure that they were informing you with news, right? But ultimately, that grew into the right sector, Azov movement, and all this whole budding system that now controls all of Ukraine for the most part. And that was being done. Like they were trying to seed that. The Charlottesville March That was the arm of the Azov movement, the public U.S. arm, the Rise Above movement. So you can see that the CIA is seeding this stuff, and it's meant to drive this kind of discussion. So all that's coming back to the point that they're trying to frame people like you and anybody else as a neo-Nazi because they're trying to create this momentum. And going into the elections and where we're going next, I mean, I think it's very obvious where this is all about. And this is not even going to get into the conversation of deep fakes and election fraud and allegations back and forth and whether they're already claiming both sides are cheating because the other side is cheating. It's like we're back in kindergarten. But that ultimately it's dangerous that if Americans now recognize that we don't have actual influence over the outcome, like look at that Princeton study about, what was her quote, that the average voter has a near zero, statistically insignificant, minuscule influence on policy. That's a Princeton study about whether we're an oligarchy or not. If we see that and we start acting accordingly, well, they lose all the perception of influence over us. I think we're already in a fascist government. I think we're already in an authoritarian government, to that other point. I think we were in there for a very long time. We're in a different state of the world where it's a time of propaganda, post-truth world, where they're just presenting this false narrative. Look at what Israel's been doing, just screaming the narrative over all the evidence in hopes that works. I think that's where we're at right now. They're losing control over the average people, Americans in particular, and I think that that's going to come to a head. And I think that's going to take it's going to be something problematic, I think, something bad. I don't want to scare anybody, but I feel that's where it's going. I think we all kind of do, Now, again, I can't predict the future, but I think that we have an opportunity with all this to truly change things for the better, not to be, kind of hot wishy-washy about it or whatever you want to call it. I genuinely believe that we have a moment right now that if we all recognize and pull away from the two-party illusion, that we could truly change things for the better. I mean, I believe that. Yeah,
and then, I always try to end with two questions alluding to that. I think definitively what a lot of people say is what you say. It's things are coming to a head. What that's going to look like, nobody knows. And I don't, it's nice to, each of us personally to create different scenarios of what it could be. I think it's unhealthy to spend too much time thinking and worrying about it's going to be a second, civil war or what. Have some scenarios and then get on with your life. And so, I always wonder, what do we do? As you mentioned, it's an opportunity. So, two questions like, what can we do? What should we keep doing every day, every week, every month? And then I also think, basic survival is to make some preps as well. Like basic stuff, not go crazy spending all of your money on a bunker or something, but, having, I talked on TNT with the Stefan Verstappen, Canadian survivalist. I'm probably get him on the podcast as well. Just basic stuff, have stored food, 6 months, a year, get on with your life. And so your thoughts on what all of us can do going forward to stave off this insanity, to try and turn things around. And then if do you think about prepping at all?
Yeah. I think it was important to do. The main things I tend to talk about, obviously, is the only vote that I truly believe actually matters in the minds of the oligarchy or the authoritarian system we're talking about is the dollar. The money, the influence with your vote with your dollar, right? I think that always matters. It's not the only thing that matters, but definitely I think you have the most power where you choose to use your hard-earned money that they're already taking half of. I think that's really powerful and we've already seen that. Whether it's political or not, whether you agree with it or not, we can see how people can mobilize with, like a Bud Light kind of thing or whatever else and truly cause them to change what they're doing. That's an important thing to recognize, and I think we can truly make a difference there. But I also talk about it's individual actions. We love to think about this in this kind of mob mentality, the whole democracy idea, you're all part of the whole and, your vote is, your duty and all this stuff. And I think what it really comes down to is recognizing that it's, you can see that. And if you think your vote makes a difference, I'm never telling you not to. I think if anything, your local side of it would mean more than anything, but ultimately it's about your individual actions day by day, how you treat people around you, how you, decide to have conversations with other people about things that that you want to inform them about, just basic things, and these are small things, but I genuinely believe that it's the whole this is where the whole be the change argument comes from. The statement is that if you change the tendencies of yourself, the tendencies of the world will also change. That's the ultimate quote that comes from. And I believe that. I believe that it's a trickle down effect or triple up effect, however you want to look at it. And ultimately that people will see that. That you open a door for somebody, that you act something, whatever. And that go, it's almost like a Milgram experiment thing. I can't do that. I can't be nice to other people. That is something we can do. And I think that's really important. There's a lot of other things that I would argue. I really hope people can take the time in this chaotic world to be informed, to question what they're looking at, to recognize that even people that may not realize they're doing it could be misleading you, right? I mean, that goes for us and anybody else. We could be wrong. That's certainly possible. So just recognize that it's on you. Self-responsibility is a tenet of actual, representative government or whatever you want to call it. Like, we need to take that responsibility and not just pretend that by checking a box that you've done your duty, because it's just not the truth, Now, in regard to prepping, I think that it's paramount. And this is not just because there's an upcoming problem. It's just something like, even like the COVID toilet paper fiasco was such a ridiculous game that showed you, oh yeah, maybe we should, because, you didn't know that was going to happen, even though that was not real. It's the idea that you don't recognize, something can happen on a dime. And that's usually how these things go historically, where everything's fine and then kind of just on a dime, like something's just collapse and break down. And all of a sudden you're left without this or that, or you don't have running water. And so the idea is just be prepared. And I agree with you. Don't go and spend your whole life savings, because who knows if it's going to be another however many years or maybe never, but get food, get water, learn how to do things, get books on how to make things you wouldn't otherwise need to make, unless there was no electricity, or learn how to cook, learn how to fix your car, basic things that might help you in those moments, but more specifically, learn things that are important for survival, and I mean, like, small basic things. You don't have to go to massive courses or whatever else. And I what blows me away is that any of this is even seen or regarded as like superfluous or like unnecessary. It's like, these are like, that we ever didn't learn these things kind of blows me away. It's kind of like never being taught about the Federal Reserve in school. I think there's a reason for that, But in any case, I agree with you. I think it's very important that we all lean into those things, because historically there always comes eventually everything collapses. No fiat currency has ever continued. Everything eventually collapses. And I think that that's, how we can see it going to happen at some point.
Yes. And, we've covered the waterfront. I like to check in with a lot of my guests, like yourself, every, once a year or every 2 years or whenever it is. And so it's great to get an update from you. Again, I think it's important for people to support, people listening to support those that they like to listen to, whether it's Last American Vagabond or Geopolitics and Empire. I've seen some people complain, like, get a real job. Like, yeah, I have had a real job. I don't, a day job. I don't at the moment. But, the fact, if you're listening to Last American Vagabond or Geopolitics and Empire, and you're complaining about us asking for support, then don't listen to Geopolitics and Empire. Like, it's like, why are you listening? It's for free. Then don't listen. But if you do enjoy it and appreciate the work that we're doing, $1, $5, whatever, and share, become a free subscriber, whatever. And so, any final thought for us?
Yeah, I'll just end on that note in general. Whether it's you or anybody listening, don't let the trolls bring you down. There are people who have a vested interest in trying to belittle and just otherwise slow down what you're trying to achieve. And it's just so obvious to me these days how, like, to your point, it's like, why would somebody take the time to go in there and, like, to comment after either watching or not, to act like they somehow don't like what you're doing? It's like, well, who made you come here to do this? Like, this is a free, and that's the whole point about most of the independent media that I truly believe in, is it's out there for free. And it's a whole value for value concept, right? And I think that basically, by the fact that we are doing what we're doing and that people are supporting it, it shows you that there's success in this. And I love your platform, man. And I think what you're doing is fantastic. And I think that we need, as independent media, to continue to come together. I'm glad you're actually getting back to Geopolitics and Empire. I think that's, I think the more we can do this at independent levels, and look, and I like TNT and what they're doing, but I love the idea of people that are just completely self-reliant. There's no other aspect to it. I think that's important. It's one of the best ways today to kind of insulate yourselves from these, things that do exist, but also the potentially growing new structures that we don't recognize yet as problems that are suddenly dumping money on things. And, it's like, we just got to be careful out there. So final thoughts in general, just continue to question everything, guys, because I think there's a lot of manipulators out there.
All right. Keep up the awesome work, Ryan. I'm sure our paths will cross either in the real world or virtual world. I've been going to some of the conferences, Greater Reset, Anarchapulco, and whatnot. The Last American Vagabond.com. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
I hope you enjoyed this Geopolitics and Empire podcast. The website is geopoliticsandempire.com, and I encourage you to sign up for the free email list that goes out with each podcast and every weekend with a collection of news headlines. The newsletter and website are our last lines of defense. we're being censored and deplatformed. It's nearly impossible to find Geopolitics and Empire on the Google search engine. We've been blacklisted. YouTube frequently takes down our videos with strikes. Facebook restricts our page. Reddit and Twitter take down posts. And after the Associated Press mentioned Geopolitics and Empire in a 2021 article co-written with NATO, our Patreon account was terminated. Vimeo also terminated our Pro account. The best free way to help Geopolitics and Empire is to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or elsewhere and subscribe to all of our media channels. You can find the video broadcast now on 5 platforms: Odyssey, Rockfin, Rumble, BitChute, and Brighteon. You can find the audio broadcast on the podcast ecosystem: SoundCloud, Apple, Spotify, and so on. My current favorite social media channels are Twitter and Telegram, but you can also find us on Gab, MeWe, Minds, Float, VK, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Finally, Geopolitics and Empire is in dire need of funding to continue. You can leave a donation, purchase a consultation with the host, or become a member to receive additional benefits. We also produce a weekly broadcast called Dissident Thinker for members and Rockfin subscribers only. We will continue to fight the good fight come hell or high water. Thank you for listening.